and Sarah Hosey.
Good morning.
Morning. Turned off, didn't it? No, it's still on. So, and we are co-equal panelists, and we'll be deciding this case. Appellant, can I get you to identify yourself for the record?
My name is Tony Wilhelm with TFCG.
All right.
DBA Extreme Communication.
Thank you. Go ahead, sorry.
Steve Smith.
All right. All right, thank you. And at the time of our pre-hearing conference, we had 3 disputed issues in this appeal. By email on July 11th, CDTFA has conceded the transactions that were involving the Indian tribes, leaving us with just the one disputed issue, which is whether the transaction with Wild Electric, Inc. was a non-taxable sale for resale. Just for my notes, the amount of that reduction in measure was how much? I know it's audit item 3. Shuts off every time we don't talk. I wanted to get the amount of the concession on the record. I know it's more than half the measure that was originally 337,904. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's the reduction in measure for audit item 3. That's no longer.
So it's 0 now.
Right. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we had that on the record. Leaving us with audit item 1. I know the disputed amount is 120. I had it. There's a portion that's not disputed that's in addition to that.
It's a credit.
All right. Okay, and we had exhibits A and B from CDTFA that include these extra additional pages that I inadvertently omitted from our hearing binder, but they are submitted for evidence. There's no objections. We talked prior to the hearing. I will admit those. And for appellant, you had exhibit 1. CDTFA had no objections to those exhibits, and so I'll admit everybody's exhibits into the record. It's my understanding from our pre-hearing conference, nobody has any witnesses for today. I could swear you in, then your testimony would be evidence. Otherwise, you're just making argument. And I know we had talked about that at the pre-hearing conference. We didn't resolve it either way. I can swear you in. Let me swear you in. Go.
Mr. Wilhelm, is your mic on? It doesn't sound like. Is there a green light lit at the bottom? Press the button, see if a green light lights.
Green light's
Leave
lit.
it on.
There we go.
There we
Mr.
go.
Smith, is that mic on?
Yeah, it just turned on.
Okay.
Sorry about earlier, we
Sorry.
didn't notice.
Thank you.
Can I get you to stand and please raise your right hand? Do you promise to tell the truth?
Yes.
All right. I was going to say the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the
Yeah, I was
truth, but
gonna
that
say that,
seems
right.
redundant, so we just get to the point. All right, so we'll have you as a witness. We had agreed that your testimony wouldn't exceed approximately 15 minutes, and the department, for ease of reference, instead of saying CDTFA, they'll be allowed to ask questions. They'll testify. They'll have 10 minutes to make their argument. You can ask questions. The panel could ask questions, and then you'll have a rebuttal, up to 5 minutes or so if you like. Then the panel may have questions for both parties, and then we would close the record, and we'll have 100 days in which to issue a decision, assuming we close the evidence today. So with that, would you like to get started?
Certainly. Thank you. We talked briefly about this. This is goes back. It started, I think, in 2009. So we're talking 10 years of recollection and memory. So, and I've prepped for this every 2 to 3 years and gotten knowledge, and then it goes away. So bear with me as I kind of go through. I wanted to take some notes just to kind of do this. In regards to Wild Electric, I want to be careful I say this. I'm not objecting that there should be a sales tax. I'm objecting to who should be responsible for it. That's been my contention all along. A little background on Extreme, I work for another company out of the Bay Area, a .com company in Fresno. For many years, .com blew up. Everybody went out of business. I started Extreme Communication, my wife and I, in 2002. Okay. Our intent back then, honestly, our focus was small business. We're ironically working for the state. We did a lot of work for the Department of Transportation because small business, requirements, put us in a really good position being a small business. Back then, schools were just starting to take. Schools back then weren't really what they were. Prevailing wage, public works projects in general weren't really our focus. We tried to do all the right things. We went to prevailing wage seminars, learned prevailing wage, certified payroll, and the techs make twice as much money. The company makes a lot less money. So it really wasn't a focus. We were more of a design build, working with small business, that sort of thing. I had an acquaintance at the time. We had been in business for 6 to 7 years. Roughly doing under $1 million a year. $800,000, $900,000 a year, holding our own, doing stuff for like Pelco, companies like that. I got a call from a friend that said, hey, Wild Electric had a job out at Wheeling International, a public works school. Not knowing how that whole process worked. I know now, after the fact, how this process works. One of the reasons I don't do it is basically what had happened is they had gotten a bid from somebody else and decided to shop it after the fact. And I got a call from a friend that knew the estimator that said, hey, this guy has a project out there. He's got $350,000. Can you do it? Okay, well, shoot. I don't have to bid it. I don't have to go through this whole process of paperwork and bonding. This guy's just calling me like after the fact. And so, hey, well, I'll look at it. So, of course, being a business, it was a good opportunity to kind of break in. Somebody knew somebody. I called them. I kind of went along the lines of, these guys have been doing this for a long time. I didn't do the research then, but I have now, is, at the time they had been in business for 40 years, averaging $8 million a year. They just tell me what to do. I'm just a subcontractor. Hey, how do I do this? What do you want me to do? I basically give them a 2-page scope of work for $350,000 based off the plans and specs they sent us for voice and data cabling. They were the electrician on the project. They were doing all the conduit, the wiring. It's a brand new building. Soltech Specific was the general. At one point I had asked, I said, okay, now how do you want me to break this up? Materials, tax, labor, this, that. They said, no, don't worry about tax. We're covering that because, we're contracted to Soltech Pacific and we don't want to double tax it, kind of a thing. So if you tax me and then they tax, if I tax it to them and then Soltech taxes them, then it's a double tax. So I took it, at face value. $350,000 to give them a quote. They gave me a contract. We move on with the work. We did the work. Everything was happy. There's a lot of paperwork floating around. At the time, the type of cable that was used was in high demand. So we have some paperwork in here supporting the fact that we weren't going to be ready for the physical cabling for 12 months, but prices were fluctuating, so we did a buy and hold agreement with Gray Bar escrow account. They held it. So we basically purchased the cable. They held it at Gray Bar. The State Center Community College people, contractors all came down, saw it. They took pictures. They signed off on it, which I don't know if it's actually relevant or not, but I'm just giving you the history on that.
Okay, thank you.
So push come to shove is, several years later, we get audited. The auditor spent 95 hours in our office. Nice enough guy. No offense, he's a state guy. And they do their thing and they eat their lunch and they take their breaks and we give them piles of paperwork and he came through after 2 weeks and he said, oh, good news is we owe you guys money. I'm like, cool, this is great. Accrual basis, cash basis. We're a small business. QuickBooks, my wife does the books, so there were some learning lessons. Well, this should have been like this, and this should have been like that. And he helped fix some of the back-end stuff. They ultimately ended up owing us money. They went back, turned it into a supervisor, and he came back a couple weeks later, and he had this look on his face. He goes, actually, my supervisor reviewed it, and even though it's been tossed out, he came back with the Indian tribe, sovereign nation, you know, that whole thing, and this Wild Electric. You guys owe us $20,000. So we argued that. Like I said, it's been 10 years. Just recently, weeks ago, the Indian stuff was found to be in our favor, that we were right and we did all the right stuff. So this is the only thing left. In this process, I have in my documents, and I don't know if you want me to reference pages, but basically the very first bill we sent them for the cable that got put in storage had sales tax on it.
Right.
Here's your bill, sales tax. I have an email, or actually at the time it was a fax from the controller from Wild Electric that says, oh, we need you to subtract the sales tax based on your conversation with the estimator and whatever. Here's our resale certificate. Fax also showed, you know, this is a fax trail that she sent to my wife, who's the the CFO. We rebuild it without tax. You know, they sent the resale certificate over, they sent us all over. Again, we're just kind of going off date. They just,
Oh, sorry. She's got to track down
Gotcha.
every word that we take, and I talk pretty fast. You're talking faster than I do, so.
So, you know, that was just that paper trail there. We just did what they told us to do at face value. We re-invoiced it without tax. We finished the project. It's all said and done. When they questioned it, and after, you know, looking at regulation, 1521 and all this kind of stuff, and consumer materials, I mean, I get it. I kind of wanted to reference the public works thing, because when we did the prevailing wage rate, there's a lot of shady stuff that goes on out there. I'm not pointing fingers at any other contractors, but one of our philosophies was, and the verbiage that I refer back to in the public work stuff is, as long as it doesn't happen more than once, basically, and there's no malicious intent. You're not trying to screw the system, you're trying to do things right. I kind of use that as an example of what we did. I wasn't screwing this, it's just what I understood as big electrical contractor told me little low voltage contractor. They go to Rod Electric with, oh, we need an XYZ letter. Oh, well, gosh, we're not paying sales tax. Of course they're going to sign the XYZ letter saying that they're not. And that's kind of what this whole decision is based on. And so I'm not necessarily saying that tax isn't due. I'm saying that I think the responsibility falls on Wild Electric as a subcontractor to the general contractor, who told me not to, you know, and that was all verbal through the estimator, the estimating guy, you know, supported by fax documents saying, please take the tax off, here's our resale number. I mean, I don't know for me that it gets any clearer. I agree that if I did this today, I wouldn't do that. I'd say, here's your tax. If you want to short pay it or do something to that effect, I would do the paper trail different. Of course, everything's by email now. But here we are 10 years later, still trying to deal with the same thing. You know, at the time, I stood big on principle. I did, you know, I'm right. I mean, as far as I'm concerned with the Indian stuff and with this, I wasn't going to hire a lawyer, hire a tax accountant. I mean, it's just the way I look at it is, if I really needed to, I go back to the Indians and give them a change order, because it was all in my paperwork. But I didn't think this would take 10 years, and the dollar amount would double when it came to interest. So now I'm kind of like, you know, so I'm kind of at your guys' mercy to kind of see it from a, you know, an impartial view, because I know that I've appealed this several times through the BOE. I've tried to do the settlement, you know, hey, I mean, it's not, honestly, at one point I thought the settlement would be like, hey, just take the interest off, we'll meet in the middle kind of thing. And they offered some settlement number, and it wasn't even on paper and email, it was like verbal. We'll give you, instead of 40,000, we'll settle for 35. Some silly number, and I'm like, no, I don't think so. So, and there is no paper trail, email trail. That's an all verbal conversation. So, the CDFA came along and said, hey, we're a third party and partial. That made a lot of sense to me. I'm not arguing, I'm not appealing this to people that work for the BOE and have BOE emails, that sort of thing. So it made sense to me. I think the fact that that the Indian thing has been dismissed, or whatever the term for that is kind of supports all this documentation that we feel that we did was right. Was it 100% right, crossing T's and dotting I's? Maybe not, but there was no malicious intent. It was done all above board. We've been in business now, we just celebrated 17 years.
Congratulations.
We still don't do a lot of public works. We don't do a lot of prevailing wage stuff. It's a different market. So I'm just kind of, that's really all I have to say, is I'm just kind of putting it out there and black and white, when you look at it, it seems pretty straightforward to me as a impartial person looking at paperwork. It's like, well, obviously, they should have known, and they sent you the stuff anyway, so send them the bill.
Sure. Okay. Does that conclude your,
Yes, I'm sorry.
do you have any questions yet? I wanted to clarify one quick thing. My review shows we don't have the resale certificate in the record, but that it's not disputed that Wild Electric issued one.
It was in the taxpayer's
Yeah.
opening brief pile.
Yeah, it was a fax they sent
Okay.
us with the fax cover sheet.
Because I saw the invoices. I don't know that I saw the resale certificate, but we don't have, if it's in there, that's fine.
Yeah, I think the exhibit's, it's around page between 70 and 75
Okay.
of our exhibit. I believe it's the original invoice, the fax requesting a new invoice, the resale certificate, and then a fax cover and a new invoice from
saw-
us back to them. So there's like
And
5 pages right around
I saw the
70.
invoices. I must have missed the resale certificates. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure I asked and got that figured out before we went on. To department, would you like to start your presentation?
Yes, thank you. This appeal should be denied because under Regulation 1521, appellant was and could only be the consumer, not the retailer, of materials, the cables at issue here, which appellant furnished and installed in its lump sum construction subcontract. And further, as a subcontractor, appellant could not take a resale certificate from its prime contractor to avoid a tax liability. Therefore, the department properly determined that the appellant owes a tax on the ex-tax cable purchases measured by the audited cost, and the appellant has not proved error in the department's determination. The facts on this issue are simple and straightforward. Appellant entered into a construction subcontract with Wild Electric to provide and install cables, which are materials, to provide a telecommunication infrastructure cabling system. The subcontract states only a lump sum of $350,000 for the contract, although the proposal and the subsequent invoice did separately state a price for the cables. Appellant purchased the cables ex-tax, and neither appellant nor Wild Electric reported or paid tax on the cables. Appellant initially tried to charge Wild Electric tax reimbursements, but then removed the tax reimbursement charge upon request by Wild Electric and receipt of a resale certificate from Wild Electric. So the only issue in dispute here is whether, under such a set of facts here, appellant could be a retailer of the cables and then take a resale certificate from its prime contractor to avoid the tax otherwise due. As you know, pursuant to Regulation 1521, generally, as a construction contractor, appellant is deemed to be the consumer of the materials, such as the cable site issue here, which appellant furnished and installed pursuant to a construction contract. And either sales tax or use tax applies with respect to the sales of the cables to or the use of cables by appellant, unless appellant can establish otherwise. For appellant to establish otherwise here that it was not a consumer but a retailer of the cables, Regulation 1521 subdivision B2A2 requires that, I quote, the contract explicitly provides for the transfer of title to the materials prior to the time the materials are installed, and separately states the sales price of the materials exclusive of the charge for installation, end quote. Here, appellant's subcontract with Wild Electric simply states under subcontract amount on page 1, a lump sum of $350,000. A lump sum contract by definition does not separately state the sales price of the materials. In addition, the subcontract itself does not explicitly provide for transfer title to the materials prior to the time the materials are installed. Therefore, the subcontract does not meet either requirement under Regulation 1521, subdivision B2A2, which are necessary for appellant to be a retailer of the materials. While appellant subsequently issued an invoice separately stating the charge for the materials, Regulation 1521, subdivision 8 explicitly provides, I quote, a lump sum contract does not become a time and material contract when the amounts attributable to materials, fixtures, labor, and tax are separately stated. So the invoice is of no legal consequence here. Similarly, appellant's proposal, which separately provides for material cost, cannot change the fact that the contract itself is a lump sum contract. Since the appellant cannot establish that it was a retailer of the material under Regulation 1521, subdivision B2A2, appellant was a consumer of the cables furnished and installed in the lump sum contract. As a consumer, there's no occasion whatsoever on which appellant could take from anyone a resale certificate for cables the appellant consumed itself. In addition, Regulation 1521, subdivision B6A provides that quote, a direct quote, a contractor cannot avoid liability for sales or use tax on materials or fixtures furnished and installed by him or her by taking a resale certificate from the prime contractor, end quote. And the only exception the regulation provided is for leased fixture situation, not applicable here. So here it's undisputed, Wild Electric was a prime contractor. As a subcontract, of course, the agreement is titled subcontract, and the subcontract identifies Wild Electric as contractor on 9.2 and appellant as a subcontractor on 9.3. So even if the appellant were the retailers of the cables, which it was not, as I just discussed, still the sale of the cables would just be a retail sale, not a sale for resale pursuant to Regulation 1521, subdivision B6A. So appellant could not avoid its liability for sales or use tax on the cables by taking the resale certificate from its prime contractor, Wild Electric. In conclusion, since it's undisputed that appellant purchased the cable X tax and neither appellant nor Wild Electric reported or paid tax on the cables, and further given that appellant has not established any applicable exclusion or exemption from the tax due, appellant owes a tax on its X-tax purchase of the cables it later consumed in the lump sum construction subcontract as determined by the audit based on the audit cost. And the appellant's acceptance of the resale certificate from its prime contractor is improper and cannot change the tax result here. Therefore, the appeal should be denied. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Questions from my panelists yet?
No, thank you.
Would you like to have a rebuttal?
Sure. A couple things here. I don't know if it's applicable, but I'm going to bring up the subcontract from Wild Electric at no point states sales tax is due. So that's just a note that I made to myself that it's a 3-page subcontract, again, from a multi-million-dollar electrician that doesn't say anything about sales tax responsibility. So, secondly is I want to be clear. I'm not trying to claim that I have an exemption. Because the whole 1521 paragraph this, paragraph that. Today I agree with that verbiage. What I'm trying to claim or explain is the responsibility of that should fall on the electrician, not on me. So I'm not looking for an exemption. I'm not looking for a regulation that disqualifies me from paying that. I'm just stating the actual facts of how this whole transpired. So,
Okay.
And then the last thing is if by chance I lose the claim or the appeal, I would ask that they would consider a reduction in interest, because as we discussed previously, that the interest has accumulated over 11 years, which I think is, way too long of a process, and not blaming the state, but I mean, I know the wheels turn slowly, but 10 or 11 years may be exceeding, realistic, interest on 10 or 11 years. If by chance it comes down and you guys say, hey, I would, you're owed the sales tax and I had to eat that, then I would hope that we could limit or disallow the interest for 10 years to be part of that number.
So the Office of Tax Appeals can't settle or compromise a case in that regard, but you're free to contact CDTFA. I know that they've got a settlement division, an offers and compromise division that, regardless of what we do, take that up with them after the fact, because we're obligated to look at the case on the merits, and we can't do the settlement type that you're asking. But I understand where you're coming from. We don't have the power to do that. But they can look into that. So
Hopefully I won't have to worry about that, but if I do, then I can address that after the
All
fact with
right.
them.
Do my panelists have questions?
No, thank you.
I had only one or two. One is, I believe it was said, I just wanted to confirm, no other party has paid tax in connection with
That's
this
correct.
liability. Wild Electric did not. The prime, unless Wild Electric was the prime, or were they still a sub?
The information available to us only showed Appellant and Wild Electric. I know in his opening statement, he mentioned another party as a general to Wild Electric.
Soltech Pacific.
But we were never aware of that. But regardless, as I said in my portion, as a sub, really it's on the sub to pay the use tax if was purchased from out of state or sales tax from an in-state retailer on the cable purchases. So regardless, so it's another layer for prime above Wild Electric. It's still the same law.
No, I understand that. I just want to make sure it hasn't been paid by someone else in the chain, because if it has been, it could be offset. But we don't have evidence that it has been. So,
Do
We
we have
did
evidence
send
it
an
hasn't been?
XYZ letter, I believe, to
Wild.
Wild Electric.
Right.
And they said tax hadn't been paid.
yeah, no, I was questioning if there was one level above that that might have. There's not a penalty in play. And so then my last question is just to confirm my numbers. This audit item was originally 145, 117, and as a result of the second revised or re-audit, it's 133. This transaction is 120, right? And then
Yeah.
audit item one is a credit measure.
Right, so in the revised audit schedules that I submitted right before this hearing started, it's the first quarter of 2009, the claim sales for resale, where it says 120,681.
That's this transaction.
That's this
Oh,
transaction.
because I'm showing that as one, hold on. We've got the
In the
invoice.
decision, it says 122,400, and it didn't
Yes.
include another $10,000 invoice. I'm not sure why.
So-
But we're down to 120,600.
For this transaction.
For this transaction, and I kind of misspoke earlier when I said, when you asked about the stuff that's not in dispute, and I mentioned the credit item, which is column 12A for 20,681, but there is also not in dispute the difference in column 12D between the 133,398 total less the,
Yeah, the one, right.
yeah.
133,398 minus this 120,681.
Yeah, and column 12E is the column that we conceded, the 213,000.
Gotcha. I'm sorry to do those types of housekeeping matters, but I want to make sure I've got the numbers right, or I mess it up for everyone.
Before we close, can we take a 2-minute recess so that I can talk to my co-panelists outside for just a second?
Sure. Sure. So we'll take a break for 2 minutes?
Yeah, but when you picked up one,
Yeah. Yeah, they pulled it up.
this is a deleted at 20,000.
WILHELM.
Reduced to 120,681.
Yes.
I understood the reason, but I don't see how the number came from. Charge of the tax, they prime regardless.
So what we discussed in private was that you've raised an issue of interest relief based on unreasonable delay, whether you know it or not. I can't recall, as I sit here, if it was addressed in the DNR.
It was never raised in appeal,
So it hasn't
although he kept on saying
Right.
the interest was going up, it was taking too long.
And-
He didn't specifically request interest relief, so we didn't have an occasion to actually pull out of the processing timeline or get response from the property sections on whether there was any delay.
And as I was paying attention to the argument and not delving down into that thought process, I know there's been settlement. So generally, usually a settlement process can account for some of that time. That doesn't mean there's not delay in a settlement process. So if we don't, and we don't have the facts in the record and it hasn't been addressed to this point, so I'm inclined to hold this open for additional briefing. I know we're talking quick. There's, one of the statutory provisions allows for relief of interest based on unreasonable error or delay by the department. You've implicitly raised that. If we don't have it addressed, we're not going to be able to address it after the fact. So we're going to hold this record open so that the matter can be briefed. It would help if I don't know how much time you may need, 15 days or 30 days, but if we can have you make an argument, which you've essentially made here, I don't feel necessarily the need to have you tell me again that it took 8 years, because I understand that. What we would need is basically have them brief it, and they effectively account for the time where this appeal was from the time of the audit until OTA took over. The test is essentially if there's an unexplained absence of work being done, that would be an unreasonable error. If there's a reason it took the time that it took, that's not an unreasonable error. So sometimes there's reasons for the length of time. But neither party's addressed it, and we would need facts to examine that and give both parties an opportunity to argue it. I'm thinking in this case, maybe we have them brief it first and we give him the chance to respond is a more effective, meaningful input for a taxpayer.
I think, Mr. Wilhelm, your position, which you stated a while ago, is that it's taken a long time, and at least implicit in that is that you think it's been an unreasonably long time. Would that be a fair statement?
That's fair to say, yes.
And as Judge Adjija mentioned, there are provisions that allow for reduction of interest when there is unreasonable delay by either the BOE, if they had the case earlier, or CDTFA. I think that with his statement here, the department has the ability to go back and find out where this appeal was and give us a timeline. I think that probably the department should provide some type of a factual statement and analysis first, and then give the appellant an opportunity to reply.
So.
Is that even possible if the BOE doesn't exist anymore? Or?
CDTFA.
Oh, okay.
They merged
So-
and took over, so
So that
it's-
whole thing changed and that was,
effectively it's a name change.
oh, gotcha.
How much time do you think you need for that? I'd rather 15, you're going to tell me 30. You might tell me more than 30.
Not more than 30, but certainly at least 15 days.
All right, can we go 30 days?
Okay.
So what they'll do is they'll have a brief with facts and an outline of a timeline.
Sure.
And their argument and opinion as to whether that was reasonable or unreasonable. We'll give you up to 30 days to respond to that. And then we'll hold this record open. We don't decide this case till we get your response. And then we will have,
Which is only applicable to the interest if we find that I'm not due the tax, then
That's true.
that's not really
That's true.
applicable, right?
That is
Yes.
correct.
But we can't wait for that. We will make issue one
After the
decision
fact,
in this
okay.
case. We have
Okay,
to
so we have
make the
to
determination.
address the interest issue first, regardless of what the overall
Yes.
outcome will be, not the other way
Because
around.
if we were to
Okay.
decide against you on the main issue, we won't have the ability to then
Gotcha.
reopen it and re-entertain. So we'll do that. I'll issue an order to memorialize that, but the clock's ticking. I'm saying now you've guys got 30 and you'll have 30 days to respond. I will issue an order to close that record, and that'll set our deadline within which to issue a decision. So, okay. Does anybody have anything else?
Nothing.
All right. Well, then the record's not closed. We're holding it open for additional briefing, but that will conclude the hearing. Thank you for coming. I think 5 minutes. We should take a 5-minute break. Is that enough for Madam Court Reporter? Do you need more time? 10? Okay, 10 minutes.